Hey guys, thank you so much for checking us out. Welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. It is Josh I have today. Josh, right from Star Wars on High, I believe.
That is correct. Yeah, that is correct. I think we've met before.
Oh, we
Our
have.
paths,
That's
yes,
right.
a couple
You're
times.
finally back on the podcast. It is so good to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for making it back. For those of us who are checking this podcast for the first time, please let us know what you're all about, where people can see your stuff.
Yeah, so I have a channel called Star Wars on High, where we do talk about everything Star Wars. In fact, we have a weekly live stream that Ben is a guest on Thursday nights. So we cover typically some of the breaking news stories and some of the current events within Star Wars. Myself and my partner on the channel, Jimmy. So I've been on this podcast I think 2 times now. So I'm back for the third trip and looking forward to it. It's gonna be a good time.
See, I think it's been more than 2 times. It's been quite a few times. We spoke about prequels. I do believe we also spoke about but you know what? Too many more podcasts together.
That's right.
It's
when we spend once a week together, it's hard to keep count of how many weeks it's been.
Right? And it's quite a different dynamic. When we have Jim, you and I, when we toss ideas between the three of us, and now we're here, you and I, to talk about our next topic, guys. We want to talk about the sequels hype. Right, there were first Star Wars films in 15 years. We want to share our overall impressions of them and now kind of see in retrospect, right? It's been a couple of years since the last movie came out. We want to digest it as the movies were coming along, before they were coming out, and after, and kind of put it all in a bottle. But before we get there, guys, today's a very special day. Today is George Lucas's birthday, our grandfather of Star Wars, the maker himself. We would like to congratulate him. From me personally, I would not be here on this channel. It was so formative for my early years. Happy birthday, George. We love you. I will always respect and admire him, even for the sequels that I was kind of like a jaded young man, always respecting that it's his uncompromising vision for what he wanted and birthing millions of fans around the world joining around the sequels films. Josh,
you mean the prequel? Yeah, you mean the prequels, right?
Yes, prequels.
Yes, and right there with you. I think it's so interesting how one kind of student's really creative vision all those years ago has kind of led us all here today, right? The fact that we're talking from different states over about this property, this kind of idea that George had. It's just so fascinating to kind of see that dynamic. The folks here watching, commenting, we're probably from all over the world, all brought together by, kind of an idea he had about creating this sci-fi world. So it's really cool. Happy birthday. It's 78 is a big number. So congratulations. And we're thankful he's here and looking forward to hopefully many more.
Mazel tov, to many more years. We love you, George. We'd love you to be with us forever. We love all of your work. I wanted actually to trampoline off, to jump off with the prequels, knowing that you're a huge prequel fan, knowing that over the years I've turned my nose around, and despite my gripes with the filmmaking of the actual films, I loved the story of it. I loved the books of it. And I know you were a young person, you were experiencing it as a kid and just relishing the whole idea. Oh my God, this is Star Wars, this is amazing. For me, it was a quite different experience. I just very quickly wanted to dive into my hype level for it. Yeah. So I was a kid, right, who immigrated to the United States. I wasn't aware of what was happening behind the screens, right? And obviously many fans weren't as well, because internet was not where it is today. And the first draft was there in 1994, and shooting has begun in 1997. And this is where it was publicly announced, and this is where the Star Wars special editions were back in theaters. You're saying hey guys, we're reminding you, by the way, in case anyone forgot, the greatest trilogy here, repackaged, fully restored with new special effects that a lot of fans enjoyed around the world, and saying that here is my pencil, here's a piece of paper, right? That famous video, I'm putting a pen to the paper, and we're creating a whole new trilogy. And Josh, when I saw that first trailer before the release in 1999, I saw Darth Maul's dual lightsaber just do this. I saw all the amazing cinematography and visuals, the unprecedented level of special effects. To this day, the hype is uncomparable. It was, it was everywhere. It was on every street, every corner. We had posters. We had people talking outside, on the street, in the elevator, in schools. Literally everyone was talking about it. Do you have any recollection of it from your elders kind of side of it?
Yeah, I mean, when to your point, and we've talked about this before, I was certainly in the younger target demographic when the prequels came out. What I remember specifically which might sound kind of silly, but the way I think about it almost is there was no internet, right? Not really any, mass use of the internet at that point. All of the hype for those movies felt organic, if that makes sense. It felt like it really just came from everyone collectively being excited for these films. And I remember from, obviously I was the child they were marketing to. So I remember from a product and marketing perspective, just the absolute sheer volume of brand deals. And I vividly remember Go-Gurt had lightsaber tubes, right? I remember Doritos had like little special, they were little like puzzle pieces that if you held up to the light, they'd look 3D for Attack of the Clones. And I even remember my Walmart here in my town built an entire tent out front just for all of the Star Wars merch, have its own section. And being a kid going through that. And so there was such like it was everywhere, right? It was in the stores. It was on every, on the commercials. It was there and prevalent. And, at this point, right, a lot of the older generation who grew up with the first films, who probably never thought they would visit those characters or that world again, I think this was before there were these mega franchises, right? This was before you had an MCU with 20 films, right? Or you would have 8 or 9, seasons of a streaming TV show you'd watch, right? This was a little bit of a different time. So I don't think anyone fully expected they would get a whole other trilogy by George Lucas. So, I mean, I remember it well. We've talked about it. It was a different level of hype. I think people were so almost unsure of what to expect, such a beloved, at that point, probably the most iconic film franchise to that point of history. And we were returning and the energy was insane. I remember that vividly.
I 100% agree with you because I remember it firsthand. And of course, we can't exclude the fact that everything that we saw and heard is from our own perspective, our own little bubble, right?
Yep.
My bubble was larger than other people's bubble because it is New York City, millions of fans, literally the crowd on 42nd Street where I saw it twice. There were 2 theaters. They're still there. One AMC and one Regal, one across the street from the other, right? And the lines were literally hours long. The hype was, you very correctly, underlined the fact that it was so organic. The energy was there. The marketing was phenomenal. Looking at these posters, who are these characters? What's going to happen here? What's the story? Of course, Drew Struzan's posters, they were coming out later on as well, with just pure phenomenal stuff. And I also want to mark, before we jump into our sequels conversation, that to me, it felt like, and it was literally not just 1999 and a new chapter in Star Wars, it was a decade of prequels. It was literally a decade because it finished off with Revenge of the Sith in 2005, but then we also got 2 years later, just when we thought like, hey, is there going to be any more Star Wars? Is it done? Boom, the Clone Wars show hits, and it's a whole different reaction to it. A whole slew of children are once again reintroduced to it. And all the way up to 2014, we're still staying with prequel story. And yet again, we come back to it in 2020 when Disney, I felt, did the right thing by fans. And they said, you know what? There's so many fans out there. Let's go finish it with the original team who envisioned the originals. And in my personal humble opinion, Dave Filoni did George Lucas's vision justice. And he was able to modify and tailor the story, which is just dramatically one of the greatest Star Wars finales ever.
Yeah, I mean, the Clone Wars, as we've talked about, added a whole other layer to that prequel era. But one thing that was, really interesting, excuse me, is, in today's day and age, we talked about organic growth.
Yeah.
What I maybe to expand upon that a little bit, we live in an age where your content is tailored directly to you, right? So when you're on Twitter, when you're in YouTube, they're recommending you videos that align with your views, right? That's why we have that kind of echo chamber. And so, right now, I might get on Twitter where I follow a bunch of Star Wars accounts and think everyone in the world is really tied into the latest news. But let me give you an example. On Friday at my office, someone was like, oh, hey, did you guys know there's a Kenobi show coming out? Like, wow, I just saw this trailer. And they're like, I can't believe it's only 6 episodes. It should be like that. Like, they are just finding out about that on Friday. Just as I'm being honest, this is yesterday as we're recording this. It's 100% true story. And so when I talk about organic, I mean, it's not like it wasn't just like, oh, you were in this bubble of Star Wars fans, and outside it wasn't like that. It was everyone kind of collectively was all in, was excited. I think at that point, and we're going to talk about this as we transition, I think at that point there was still quite the reverence for Star Wars, right? Which is maybe a little different than what we had for the sequel trilogy. But that's what I mean by organic growth, right? It wasn't just like, oh, well, I follow a bunch of Star Wars people and I make Star Wars videos, so all my recommended is Star Wars and everything I buy. It wasn't like that. It was like everyone in the community was kind of hyped for these films. So.
Yeah, and 100% agree. And once again, it's I was there. I remember it clear as a bright day. It was just the energy, the intensity was there. I remember going into the Force Awakens. We'll get right into. Yeah. It wasn't the same, man. I don't think, honestly, and maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it will never be the same. Specifically, the Phantom Menace, like it was just through the roof when every floor of your like 6th floor high school, we had like 5,000 students in the school. Everyone is talking about it. Girls, boys. Somebody's like, what is Star Wars? Oh, this movie's really cool. Oh, I need to go check it out because everybody's checking it out, right? But anyway, guys, let's jump right into it. Years later, the selling of Star Wars, the excitement behind it, and the reservations that a lot of fans had. I'm going to set the stage here, Josh, if I may, and we'll dive right into it. So, funny tidbit. Where, how, and when. Mark Hamill relates to us that he had spoken with George Lucas at an earlier time back in the 80s, where George told him he planned actually 3 trilogies. And of course, these stories, they play around, they vary, and you could Google and find the documents and research to, reinforce that and give you all those proofs and documents. But in general, George always had an idea for 3 trilogies. And he said, hey, possibly I'll have a cameo for you in episode 9 as well. And in May of 2011, this is where George renewed the development for these films. He said, you know what? Perhaps the Skywalker saga is not yet done. And it's not to discredit George in any way. This is what all creators do. Sometimes you leave your content, put it on the table, shelf it. I don't think I have any more stories to tell. And you come back to it. Right. There's nothing unusual, uncommon about it, right? So he gets right into it. And he said, I'm kind of looking to retirement. I'm going to be 70 years old. I want to spend time with my newborn daughter, with my family. And this is when Bob Iger approached him and said, why don't you sell Star Wars? If you don't want to do it anymore, give it in some other capable hands, and we'll go from there. So in August of 2011, George Lucas sits Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford and has a discussion with them like, hey, guys, would you be willing to come back? I'm writing these new treatments for the Star Wars. Would you be willing to reprise the roles? They all unanimously said yes, right? So my first question is, did you have any thoughts on the legacy cast joining this project?
So, and I apologize. I might take time to cough in this hour conversation. Still coming over some sickness here. So apologies there. But, one thing I maybe want to say, and I'd be curious, to get your perspective on here, Ben. And let me preface this. I am by no means a Star Wars historian. When I say, when I talk about these things, these are just my personal experiences and my perceptions of where I was at that time, right? So I know folks might disagree with maybe my read on the situation, but this is kind of what I personally experienced. Right. Is after the prequel era, after those original 1, 2, and 3, episode 1, 2, and 3 came out, movies that again are my favorite era of Star Wars, my favorite movies. So I don't mean this as an insult to the prequels, but it seemed like, especially for the older demographic and for maybe the critic kind of wing of media, Star Wars had kind of lost its reverence. A lot of people didn't hold it in maybe the same level of esteem, right? It wasn't like this wholly untouchable franchise anymore. Right. And there was this kind of reputation that, when episode 1, 2, and 3 were done, that like, it had lowered maybe the original 3, right? There were people, I know that perception has changed because as my generation has grown, we've kind of been able to reshape the narrative. Right. But a lot of fans, especially I remember, parents, my parents and other parents who grew up with the original films were not as big of prequel fans. And so I say all that to say, when the sale of the rumblings of a sale to Disney came about, the immediate reception and perception from the outside that I saw was good, because they had just started to make successful Marvel movies in the years leading up, right? We had Iron Man, and we started to see the shaping of this shared universe, and fans were really on Team Disney. Disney bought Marvel and started turning these unknown heroes, because Iron Man and Captain America, while known by the comic community, were not mainstream heroes by any way. And they were starting to make these household brands, right? That had just started to grow 2 or 3 years prior. And so I think belief in the Disney brand was very high at that time. And so the perception was, to get to your question, okay, the original cast is back. Like, this is going to be more true to the originals I know, right? This is going to be more in line with the Star Wars that I love. And I remember, for me, someone who really liked the prequels, I wasn't quite as connected to the original cast, right? Those weren't the heroes that I grew up with. The way that we are talking about Kenobi, the way I'm talking about Kenobi, is the way those older fans felt about seeing Mark Hamill back and seeing, come on in. Yeah, exactly. And so that's how they felt about seeing Mark Hamill and, of course, Harrison Ford, oh my gosh, around, right? So that was kind of the hype. I think it was a very smart move by Disney, because they know what fans love, right? And so getting the original actors, to me, bought some credibility to a next set of films coming out. It was like, okay, the originals are back. We're bringing the crew back. We're Disney. We know how to make better products than anyone, better quality movies, and bulk movies than almost anyone in the game. We've got your original actors back. You can trust us. Mm-hmm. I remember that initial kind of period when those rumors started happening, when it was officially confirmed, etc. There was, like, to me at least, a perceived optimism in the community, a real excitement. Like, we have a strong group behind the helm, and we're going to bring back the originals we love. That seemed to be kind of the feeling in the air at that time. And we'll go into more, but that's kind of how it felt. I'm not sure what your kind of perception was at that time.
No, very, very interesting points. I remember that a lot of us felt disenfranchised with the prequels. Like, some of my generation, I don't want to say everybody, that's just simply not true. Yeah. I mentioned to you before we started rolling the film, I'm having this little kind of like a tidy Twitter war there, which I don't like participating in. I feel so damn filthy just being in it and being nasty to people. I can be accused of that too. Like, come on, you're saying this, you're trying to like rewrite history and throw us disenfranchised fans under the bus. Like, people, no, you don't understand. There weren't unhappy people about prequels. Like, don't shift the narrative. I was there in those early 2000s forums talking to Star Wars fans. I was trying to defend my stance that I love Star Wars. Like, no, all Star Wars. It's just vitriol, early vitriol there.
There are people, just to lean into what you're saying. I recently have made some prequel themed videos because of Kenobi. And I've seen comments like, "Oh, the prequels are such a disappointment," and like, like that narrative still exists, which is fine, whether it's minority or not. It was a real thing.
Right. But anyway, just to get back to the good first vibrations there. Like, okay, so here is a new start, to a new chapter. George tried it. He did it his way. I came to, before the release of the sequels, I came to admire the fact that George did it on his own terms. Independent films with a budget of blockbuster cinema, which this precedent will never be repeated again, ever. Complete and total freedom to do. You know what? F you to the critics. I'm doing it the way that I like to do it. I'm making movies for children. If you don't understand Jar Jar, if you don't like my last, please go somewhere else. Do something else. I will respect this forever. I don't have to like prequels to have like a mature outlook on it and say, you know what? It's his vision. It's his baby. Do you like anything that grew out of it? Heck yeah, I do. And I mentioned to you 1,000 times before, all the books, all the comics, the amazing Clone Wars show, which to me was George Lucas's swan song. I'm like, oh my God, here is this creative force of storytelling, of American cinematography. He's back and he's swinging hard, man. All these stories, the fall of Anakin Skywalker, amazing, right?
Yeah, fleshed out.
Yeah, so this first, ripples are there. And now we continue on with the story. Now it's October 2012, and George Lucas announces, okay, I'm selling the Star Wars. This is the decision I came to. He announces that Kathleen Kennedy is now in front of it. She will take care of all the business. He has worked with her for many, many years. For some fans, we don't know, all the way dating back to the Indiana Jones. And he gives her the sequel treatment, saying, please follow these treatments. This is what I want, right? Yeah, there's some, I believe, original 1980s outline there, along with 2010s, 11s kind of newer treatments that he was working on. It's passed to Bob Iger, and the rest is history. And I don't want to regurgitate what went on there and then discuss this. We're talking about the hype of sequels. And Josh, if you don't mind, let's just start right with The Force Awakens. This is where I want to spend most of our time. This is the biggest movie. This is what set up all the hype. The Force Awakens, the first Star Wars film in 15 years. So The Force Awakens title was announced, revealed in November 6th of 2014, followed by the first teaser, small little tiny teaser you could see on YouTube the same year. Josh, what was your first impression of that teaser?
So at this point, as someone who was a kid, right, when the prequels came out, now I'm in high school, upper high school, early college days when the sequel era emerges. So different perspective, right? I remember when the teaser for The Force Awakens came out, I actually was a little on the fence, meaning I was someone who was maybe a little bit, you're in that phase of life where you're maybe like to go against the crowd a little bit, right? So there's the Disney love fest at this time going on for all the Marvel movies.
Right.
And, I always was a bigger DC fan myself. So we just had The Dark Knight. So I'm like, oh, these movies were much better. And, Disney, they're going to, Disney owns everything, right? I had that kind of I don't know, cynical kind of, I guess, view, maybe that kind of high school, teenage kind of rebellion there. But I remember that the online community, the communities I was in were, the hype was actually there, not to the same level as the prequels, but the general community sentiment was high. I can specifically think Jeremy Johns, right? One of the biggest YouTube reviewers on this platform. I'm sure most of you know him. I remember him getting his Star Wars curtain. Like he had a curtain from when he was a kid. He would wear it around his neck for the trailer reactions, right? Because in my feed, there's reactions everywhere to Star Wars, right? And I thought those first, those first kind of teasers and those first kind of promotional items start to build up kind of the older fan base's excitement, because what we're seeing early is the imagery that they grew up with, right? The kind of visuals, we know the actors who are attached. So that initial
from a prequel to decades to original decade.
Exactly. And we see a lot of respect for the original bit. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the actual release of the movie. I have some thoughts there. But one thing, that I did notice as well, when we talk about levels of hype, is my generation and, and this upcoming generation, they had their own new Star Wars, and that was Marvel. Right. What Iron Man and even, what DC had done with The Dark Knight, they did not have the same kind of reverence, I keep using that term, for Star Wars that the older generation did. Because when I grew up, my parents, Star Wars was it for them. It was like a huge phenomenon. When Star Wars came out, it was massive. It was huge. It was ground changing. And so I grew up knowing about Star Wars, right? I grew up being told about Star Wars. Because you're raised by those people. You're raised by the people who grew up. Well, it was changing, where Star Wars was not the only massive successful. We had things like Avatar, which was breaking records left and right. We had things like The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger's like legendary performance, right? So we had these other pinnacle moments, and Star Wars for a lot of us wasn't on the same level as it was for the generation before, right? When it was new and fresh. And so I think the reason the hype was lower overall is I think the younger demographic coming up didn't have the same connection to Star Wars that the generation before them did. The generation that grew up and saw that these movies as pinnacle, world-shattering, new, fresh, innovative films, that kind of wasn't as present in the younger demographic, if that makes sense.
That's an exceptional point. Honestly, I did not even contemplate. You're so right. There were so many movies out there that kind of took the placeholder. Nothing was quite on the same level, and never will be, as Star Wars. Maybe Lord of the Rings. To me, that's the defining, generation-defining trilogy of the 2000s. For me personally, it did for 2000s what the original trilogy did for the 70s
and one
80s.
Comment, because Lord of the Rings is a good example, we also had Harry Potter.
Yeah,
and my generation had grown up with this wizard who was kind of their Luke, right, in some ways, right? It was their young hero who had to overcome the big bad. So they had seen this. And think about this, I was thinking about this kind of recently. When my kids grow up, right, when the next generation comes up and we're the parents, a lot of parents from my generation, their Star Wars is going to be the Marvel, the MCU, they're gonna be like, oh, and the quotable lines will be like, I am Iron Man with the snap, right?
Yeah.
Those are gonna be the I am your father moments. Those are gonna be
Mhm.
those big moments that they tell their kids about. Oh, you can't imagine the theaters when this movie came out, because Infinity War, Endgame, they have Endgame had the highest grossing box office of all time. And so they're going to talk about that. Oh, all our heroes died and they turned to dust. It's going to be the same way
Yeah.
that my parents talked about Star Wars and how crazy the theaters were and how wild it was, is the way a lot of people my age are going to talk about the Marvel, the MCU. So that's why I think there was maybe it's a different level of hype, right?
Yeah.
It's just the changing of the guard, almost the change, because now my generation is probably was the top movie going audience at that time.
Yeah.
And why we knew Star Wars and like why I was a massive prequel fan. I understand that I am a Star Wars fan, and I'm not the average person from my age group, right? I liked Star Wars and was really into Star Wars. So I was obviously plugged in, but maybe not as much as my friends were, who were really into Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and the MCU. Those were their babies. So long answer, but just something interesting to think about.
No, it's fantastic.
That period in time.
You're giving me so much food for the brain to digest. Like, wow, all right, cool. But now specifically home in after that first debut teaser, same year, I believe in November or December 18th, actually, I have it noted here.
Yep.
The first trailer comes in. As far specifically as that trailer is concerned, and you saw it, what is your hype level? What is your anticipation like?
I was actually pretty hyped. Now, again, I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm plugged in. I felt like a lot of people, first of all, we are fans, right? We love the certain themes, motifs, imagery of Star Wars. And so anytime I see those, you can't help, even the most maybe cynical part of you, right? If you're a big fan, you can't help but feel that Grinch moment where your heart is growing and warming up a little bit, right? And so one thing I remember being striking about the first images that we started seeing in the trailers, etc., was I thought they did a really good job of not really revealing the plot in any major way. I really liked that about those, but it did feel homey to me almost. It felt like it felt familiar. The way and we'll talk about this again a little bit later, but the imagery, I think Disney intentionally spent a lot of time making the look and feel of the technology and the ships, etc., look like what we had seen in episode 4, 5, and 6. So, we live in an internet-driven time now, right? This is the internet age when these trailers are coming out. And I go back to reactions. I remember going to my favorite YouTubers and watching the reactions, right? And getting that kind of hype back up. And I remember, again, and there's kind of we're going to talk about this, there's a little bit of a rewriting of the narrative. There was real excitement from a lot of folks about The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
There was a real like, hey, the sequels didn't vibe for me, but Disney's at the helm, the best company in the world, right? At making entertainment. They have a whole theme park.
Yeah.
They have an entire, wing of fantastic animators, and they have so much to offer. They're going to steer the ship correctly. So when that first teaser comes out, it feels familiar. It feels like Star Wars. And it's backed by the biggest company of all time. And don't forget this. This is another thing that I think it's like completely forgot. Like the public opinion of George Lucas at this time is not at its height.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are like, George Lucas took Star Wars and lowered it.
Yeah.
He lowered it. This old crazy guy, he caught lightning in a bottle back in the, people were mean. It's just, people don't realize, like, people were mean to George Lucas because he talks about it. George Lucas is like, I didn't want to make any more movies so people could torment me.
Well, apparently that didn't happen, according to some Twitter experts.
And
maybe I was going crazy. I don't know.
Well, it's a weird, and that's a whole other conversation. I don't exactly understand why prequels fans aren't willing to acknowledge that there was fan backlash. I think they want to pretend it was the media driven because that somehow makes Star Wars fans look better. Yeah. But Star Wars fans and any fans can be very sports team fans, right? Yeah. Can be really, really unpleasant to the people that we
jump the ship, stop supporting your team, only to come back years later to, oh, no, prequels are good again. Now let's use that and weaponize it to attack something else.
So at this point, the George Lucas belief is low. Maybe you still loved him, but you didn't really trust him. So you're like, okay, we got George out of here. Look at this imagery. This is Star Wars. We got Disney who can't fail. Disney doesn't miss, right? This is Disney. They don't make bad movies. And think about this too. J.J. Abrams is attached. J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies were held in pretty good regard. those first couple
as a resume, excuse me for interrupting you, right?
Maybe real Trek fans don't like really hardcore Trek fans never loved those films because they were more action Star Trek than they were the really deep philosophical Star Trek that I think those really core fans loved. You have, at least in the common sphere, a very popular director attached. You have this imagery, this music that's bringing us back to Star Wars. I think that the common feeling at that time when that first trailer came out is like, we got a winner. Like, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
And
it's like
we'll talk
almost,
about.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's almost like J.J. Abrams' movies, Star Trek films were a perfect resume for this film.
They were.
But
because one thing I often heard about J.J. Abrams, like Star Trek movies, is they didn't feel like Star Trek. They almost felt more like Star Wars, more sci-fi, like action. And so it's like, oh, good. He's kind of going to where he's actually comfortable. Yeah. And so, and continue on. But that to me, that was evident. There was a positivity that there isn't today.
I want to circle back a little bit to that first teaser and the first trailer from my angle. Yeah. And the moment first back to 2012 when they announced the original cast, Carrie, Mark, and Harrison are returning to Star Wars. Immediately right there, I felt it. I was talking about it with my brother, with my friends. I'm like, oh man, we're walking on thin ice here. You don't do that. Their stories are over. The Skywalker saga ends with episode 6. Why don't you be bold and brave and tell George Lucas, we don't want these. Let's start from scratch. Why don't you give us new treatments and start from the beginning? The Star Wars universe, it is so large. It is so huge. At this point, it is beyond the Skywalker bloodline. So immediately I'm having alerts there. I'm like, this will not please everybody, 100%. This will divide the fandom right down the middle. Me knowing how the fans are, including myself and my jaded experience with the prequels. Right? And you're very right. You were right when you pointed out that a lot of us felt disenfranchised. And this 2012 and 14, we felt like, oh my God, we're resurfacing now. We're breathing again. It's away from George Lucas. Again, may sound toxic a little bit, but we thought it was going to be a new fresh start, new beginning. And here is this first announcement. And I'm like, let's pause here for a second. Let's see what's going on. When the first teaser hits, and I start hearing this nonsense about Johnny Boyega. Oh my God, they hired this black guy, for a stormtrooper. I could not believe all these trolls from early 2000s resurfacing, rearing their ugly heads, and start criticizing an African-British actor with an American accent who is going to be one of the major roles in this movie. Did we suddenly forget about Billy D. Williams? To me as a kid, it was always 4 heroes, not 3. Without Billy D. Williams, Star Wars would never be the same. And now this is this new, talented, charismatic actor, and people are already crapping on it based on one teaser. And I'm like, oh man, all right. I hope this does not turn around with the same with the prequel hate. Followed by the first trailer. And now this is my biggest level of caution / excitement, because I see everything on screen that looks right, like you said. Perfectly presented picture. J.J. Abrams, who I kind of sort of questioned because I wanted another director that I'll bring in my future question to you. I wanted another previously announced director, but J.J. was it, with kind of sort of George Lucas's blessing, because we didn't get the full gist of what was happening behind the scenes after the fact. Sorry, guys, for the quick interruption here. But anyway, we were talking about Bob Iger. All the promise was there. All the pieces were on the chessboard. And once again, to reiterate the point, that we supposedly had George Lucas's blessing. And there is two specific points in this trailer which completely sold me. First, it was Rey's tears. Right, Daisy Ridley, this gorgeous young new actress, and she's portraying this new female protagonist, which I always wanted to be like a female version of Luke, but it's her coming of age story. And when she's tearing up in there, it was so visceral and so raw. And my critique of the Star Wars prequels was that there was not a lot of emotional stuff that would elicit emotion. And I looked at that, and I'm like, oh my God, holy space Anakins, this looks so right. I want it to be and my only expectation, my only ask, my only desire was not, it needs to be this and that, it needs to have such and such star plot. My only expectation and desire was, please make me feel something. I want a Star Wars movie that doesn't look like a 3-hour CGI roller coaster ride. I want something that has gravitas. I want something that has layered personalities. Maybe it doesn't have to be deep. Star Wars was never deep, right? But something that makes you feel something. Josh, please add to it.
One thing I was going to say about J.J. Abrams as well, that I was listening off Star Trek, but as I was sitting here, I was like, wait, what else did J.J. Abrams do that people really? It was Super 8. If anyone remembers the movie Super 8, which felt like kind of a love letter to those sort of old 80s style, almost a Steven Spielberg-esque kind
Goonies.
of film, right? People felt like, okay, he gets that era of filmmaking. He'll be able to bring that same energy as well. So I did want to call that out as another reason to believe in JJ.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about and this will become maybe a bigger plot point as we move on. We talk about the blessing of George, right, on this new trilogy. I think, again, as I said earlier, I think it's always humorous because Star Wars fans we're so different. We really are, and what we like and what we're excited about. And while, again, I feel like perception of George Lucas at this time was not in the highest regard. He was not held up after the prequels as some sort of master filmmaker, right? So it's funny that there was such a desire for like George's blessing from a lot of people who also didn't like the movies that he had complete freedom over and made, and they had very negative thoughts about. So we had this weird situation where, as Star Wars fans, you want to love the creator, the guy who made these original films that meant so much to you. But on the same token, he made films that like missed the mark for so many. I think a lot of fans had trouble kind of like knowing what to do. Like, I love George Lucas. He's the best, but he also made these movies I hate. I want him to be a part of the sequel trilogy and bless it, but also I don't want him to make it because I hated the prequels. So there was just this interesting situation. I think you see it play, and it carries over to this day. And we're not going to go down too much in the rabbit hole here, but you'll still hear people talk about George's original vision when they talk about upcoming projects like, Ahsoka, Mandalorian, whatever the case may be. And it's just this weird space we have to live in because, there are so many fans who respect George's vision, love it all, but there's a lot of fans who love the original trilogy and really never jived with anything after that, right? So George had a big hand in a lot of the movies that they disenfranchised them from. So how do you kind of rationalize that? I think it's always been an interesting area for Star Wars fans to be in.
Yeah. And I think a lot of fans like myself who supported, who loved George, who just didn't agree or just simply liked his prequels, we wanted him to delegate. Hey, like you create the story like you did with the original trilogy. Yeah. And then arguably Empire Strikes Back, right? Kushner's work is considered to be the best in Star Wars. The best,
yes.
Right? It's kind of makes sense. Like he creates the vision. He's the mastermind. He's genius world builder, right? George Lucas. And then have somebody else execute it. And then they announced that J.J. Abrams, he will direct it, like I said, with his Star Trek resume films. But before that, several other known directors were considered for the role. First and foremost, right, it came out that George Lucas wanted Steven Spielberg. He declined. There was Matthew Vaughn with his X-Men First Class movie that shattered the minds of X-Men fans. You had Chris Nolan, you had Joss Whedon, you had Peter Jackson, you had David Fincher, and you had Rian Johnson, who didn't make the cut. We'll get to him, I promise, guys. Which one of these directors were you like, if you were hearing the buzz at the time, you felt it would be ideal for the movie?
Well, at that time, as a Christopher Nolan like super fan, that always sounded great. But I never felt like Star Wars really fit him. So Inception is a movie I adore, right? The Dark Knight trilogy, of course, but like Inception is a movie I really, really adore. And he's obviously made some really, but his genre of filmmaking, until recently, he's kind of done a couple of historical pieces with Dunkirk and upcoming Oppenheimer movie they're filming right now about the creation of the nuclear bomb. His movies were always very much Christopher Nolan movies. They're very much these almost otherworldly ideas we experiment with. The Prestige, we have, oh my goodness, we have, Tenet most recently, which plays
Memento.
with Interstellar. Yes, Memento, Interstellar. That play with these, they get weird a little bit. Like you have to kind of be like, whoa. And then usually at the end with a lot of his movies, it's a it's a theme he has where at the end it becomes clear, in the end it kind of unravels, or you get the picture. And so why, that would have generated the most hype for like a high school me. I recognize he really doesn't have probably the right touch for for Star Wars. Maybe a standalone. I'm not sure a trilogy, although I love The Dark Knight, but he just does it different. I can't see him telling a traditional Jedi story, which maybe is what the series needed. But, if you're fitting in the main line, a couple of other directors you called out were interesting. Steven Spielberg, remind me, when The Crystal Skull came out, was that Steven Spielberg who directed that?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. A movie that I hated. I hated that movie. I saw that when I was younger. I thought that was terrible. It doesn't even hold a candle to the originals, right? And anyway, so Steven Spielberg at that point wasn't like a pulse raiser for me. I know they were close friends and it made a lot of sense. But Steven Spielberg, outside of, you got to remember where I am. It's like, okay, Steve, the guy who did Jaws, E.T., and, Indiana Jones, like that's just, that's where it's at. So as far as I was concerned, J.J. Abrams actually was a really intriguing pick for me, because it was like, oh, I've really loved what he's done with Star Trek. I like Cloverfield, was another movie he did that I really liked, and he had done Super 8, which is a movie I was younger. I went out and bought it on Blu-ray because I really liked that movie.
My younger brother is a big fan of that movie.
It was very nostalgia in the best way. It was very respectful nostalgia, like that I really loved. And so I was very much on board with J.J. Abrams. I'm sure you had someone though that you had pegged. Who was your kind of top director choice at the time?
I love Josh, how we built this report. When you like finalize your notes, like you pass the baton so skillfully. I'm still learning the technique, man. It's like, Ben, boom, take it away. Thank you. But when Matthew Vaughn was actually signed on to do it, I was absolutely ecstatic. I believed that his X-Men film represented everything Star Wars needed to be. Keep it simple. Don't over dramatize it. Don't give it needless complexity, extra meat, extra bells and whistles of modern cinematography. He understands classic cinema. And Matthew Vaughn, the reason that I love X-Men franchise for the most part, and especially the First Class, is that also as a comic book reader, right? Many of you guys know who are watching this podcast that I managed a comic book store for 13 plus years. I was in it for many years. Matthew Vaughn would take familiar characters that you knew from the X-Men franchise, and he would sprinkle, the ideas around, and he would create a kind of plot or narrative that is not necessarily origins or close to source material. But what he did was he understood the heart and soul of Stan Lee's work. He understood what makes these characters live and breathe and make relatable to people. It wasn't about, oh, look at this mutant superpower or his costume. He looks so cool. He found their heart and soul, their humanity, and you saw it in the X-Men film. And I said, this is what I want future Star Wars to be. Not this sugar-coated, beautiful, overproduced, immaculate picture. I want heart and soul. I want gravitas. I want a story that is unexpected, that is fun, that is exciting, that goes beyond the Skywalker bloodline. Do something different with it. Bold with it. Maybe it will alienate a couple of people in the process. Maybe it will alienate me. I saw plenty of movies which I think are invaluable to the world cinema, but I personally don't like. Clockwork Orange. It's an invaluable film to filmmaking in general. You must see it. It's gonna be everybody's cup of tea. No, but moving closer to the release date, there were a lot more marketing materials all over the place, at least here in New York City. I just wanted to get a quick stance from you. Like, do you remember how they were advertising it?
I do. I remember it was not close to the prequels in the amount of content. Now, let me preface this.
Right.
Generations have changed.
Right.
I was the child when the prequels came out. They were marketing towards me. I was seeing the ads all the time. I was seeing them at the store. But I never felt like as a late high school or early college individual that when I went to the store, it wasn't everywhere. It was there. It was prominent, but it was nothing like the prequels. It was nothing at the same level. And I remember specifically in the marketing, there was a heavy, I remember BB-8 was big in the early kind of merch. And I was like, oh, kind of a cute droid. And then the Kylo Ren felt like, to me, as we're seeing, they were really promoting him heavily because we didn't really know who the Jedi was, right? As we'll get into, we didn't really know who the main protagonist was. We thought it was probably John Boyega, right? At least I did. Going to the movie, I was like, oh, is it John Boyega the main character, or is it Rey? You know, I didn't know who's this main hero. And you have Kylo, who was like the known villain, right? And so he seemed to be what they leaned into the most, this kind of homage to Vader. You know, what's his, you know, he admires Vader, what's his relationship, etc. But it was never to me at that same level as what we saw with the prequels. But again, it does matter what age group you're in when these movies come out.
Yeah.
I literally I remember kids with Go-Gurt tube lightsabers in the Geonosis pit for Attack of the Clones. Like, I remember that, you know, like it was everything. So
no, it was phenomenal. And you know what I missed a lot? Actually, I agree with you. When the first posters were being, because in New York City, they were all over places, on the buses, on the streets, on the bus stops, anywhere you went, you had like a lot of different posters. And I looked at it, and honestly, I am personally not a huge fan of digitizing actors, just like sprinkling them all over in the thing. I was missing Drew Struzan's art with prequels. They looked like art pieces, man. I'm like, oh my God, it belongs in a museum, right? And forget the content of the film. You look at the picture alone, and there's so much story there. There's so much juicy things happening. You're like, oh my God, I can't wait. It's like you got that high on Star Wars. Even when, I believe, even after the first a prequel came out, it was like I had all those mixed feelings. Even with part 2, even with part 3, I'm like, oh man, they're selling it to me, man. They're pushing it to you, like they want you to like
I really
goddamn, like I'm really like this, like mind control me or something. The marketing for prequels was phenomenal. The art that supplied it was phenomenal. With sequels, you see the Force Awakens poster everywhere, but it's like something about it feels orchestrated. Something about it feels like somebody's like tapping into it, like all these sci-fi futuristic films, you know, or Mass Effect trilogy, when you walk by like a digitized holo and suddenly it shifts the picture and it starts speaking to you directly. Hey, Ben, won't you like to see the Force Awakens? You're going to like it. It is just for you. Like that's the kind of thoughts and feelings I was getting.
I think, you know, on a silly side note, I think Disney is not good at posters, and I don't believe they still are to this day. They are heavy digital posters, and they just are not as good. So that's just a side note here. I don't know why Disney is weak. I don't know why Disney is weak at posters, but they've never seemed to be strong with posters. I mean that about the Marvel movies too. There's a lot of them that are the floating head kind of stack, which is, I'm looking at the Force Awakens poster over here on my second monitor. It is very much the kind of cluttered, stacked, floating head, you know, floating torso vibes, which you know, are not my personal preference when it comes to it.
So now, you know, Josh, were you gonna say something else?
No, I was gonna say, you know, one thing I do remember, and I think you might even be bringing us here, is the ticket pre-sale for
months in advance.
Yeah, I remember at that point it was hard to get tickets for opening night. I did go opening night, of course. It was very, I remember it was still an experience, right? This point, most of us can get them on our phones and reserve our seats. And so it was still quite an ordeal to get tickets. So I did know the interest was there pretty quickly, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I remember that as part of what's become part of the movie cycle now on these big films is, when did tickets go on sale, right? You've seen it with recent Spider-Man, recent Marvel movies. It becomes part of like the experience is staying up late to get like the midnight tickets so you can get it on the first day so things aren't spoiled for you. So I remember that piece of the period as well with the Force Awakens, where that was when I started to realize there was quite a bit of fan excitement, right? Not to the level of the prequels, but there was definitely people clamoring to see the film, especially on opening night. So
Josh, before we get into the meat of it, of the Force Awakens, I'm realizing here the questions that I wrote out warrants at least 2 more podcasts, or at least 1 more podcast, honestly, because it looks like we're stretching it. I don't want to hold you here for way too long, but I wanted to start talking about at least the Force Awakens, because again, you and I can both agree that this is the most crucial point, right? This is the apex. This is where you get all the fans, and this is where you keep the face or you drop your ass on the ground and like it's not going anywhere. So I wanted to kind of like dive into it and ask questions about the Force Awakens.
You know,
did you?
What?
Yeah, go
ahead. Sorry. No, I was gonna say one thing I could say to start us off, maybe, and you know, you have some specific questions lined up.
I do, yeah.
But there was opening night a real excitement in my theater. I remember it was packed. I remember people were cosplaying.
Right.
I had my Star Wars shirt on, of course. We're all ready to go. And I remember the hype in theater opening night was there. It was prevalent, and it was actually, it's the perfect time of year. It's December. It's a week before. Well, it's a couple weeks before Christmas, if I recall.
Yeah.
And people are excited. People are starting to get off school, and that opening night experience I thought was actually really fun. And what I say next in the coming, questions, won't maybe click for everyone, because I actually like The Force Awakens.
Mhm.
It's actually my favorite of the sequel trilogy. We'll talk about maybe why as we go on. But I remember that opening night, the crowd energy. It's so much fun. I actually really like opening night crowds to a point. The applause can be kind of a mixed thing, because I'm like really absorbed in the film and people are like clapping, can kind of take me out. But there's a certain energy level to the films that really sticks out to me. And the hype during the whole sequel era, there was more hype during this movie's opening night than in any of the other opening nights that I felt, because I saw them all on the first Thursday possible, right? This one had the most excitement in that opening night than the rest, was one thing I wanted to call out.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
I remember getting the tickets a month and a half, 2 months in advance, and I was such in a rush, and like all of these online ticket sellers were like bumming me out, but I eventually got, I posted, I wanted 11 tickets. By mistake, they gave me 22, 11 tickets free. So I invited a bunch of extra fans. We went to here on Lincoln Square, off Lincoln Square, a couple of blocks away. There's like a big AMC theaters, like out the True IMAX. The entire room was filled with my friends who were watching Star Wars. But Josh, now you're sitting there. You talk about the preliminary hype. You kind of took us there where I wanted to start. And here is Josh sitting there. And now, right before the crawl begins, just tell me, like initially, like on a small note, and then we'll really dive into it. Now here's the moment of truth. Now we get to the story of Star Wars. Forget the hype, forget the posters, forget the media. It's just, now it's one-on-one kind of thing. It's Josh versus the screen. What are your expectations? What did you want to get out of this movie?
At this point in my life, I would not have considered myself, we go through phases as fans, right? Where some things are like your top and some things are your, right now I'm really into Marvel. Right now I'm really, whatever the case might be. And I remember at this point, I was obviously a big Star Wars fan, but I wasn't maybe as involved in the community, as active and deep diving as I am today. And I think that played to my advantage, because I went into Force Awakens a lot more like, I haven't really loved Star Wars in years, right? Since, if we talk about the Clone Wars and stuff, but I hadn't loved it the same way I had since I was, 10, 12 years old in the theater for Revenge of the Sith, right? I haven't had that feeling leaving the theater for Star Wars. I haven't had that feeling in a long time. And so I was pretty much probably in the best state of mind possible of just like, okay, like I really don't care. Like, let's see it. I don't, to me, it was just pure, like, okay, cool. Like I'm ready. Like I'm not, my expectations are whatever, I was just ready to go. And I think that could be why it's still my favorite of the sequel trilogy. It's like that first impression matters. And when you go in kind of expecting like, well, let's see, Luke and and Han and Leia are great, but like, Anakin and Obi-Wan are my guys. Like, so I don't really, maybe it's cool to see these old actors again. So I think I probably went in the perfect state of mind to see the movie. Long story short, expectations were low and I was ready to just have a good time. Theater energy is high. I'm sitting there. I'm excited. I'm ready to go. It's probably the best way to be. So for me,
it was just a tiny bit different. So I have not seen a Star Wars feature film that I could get behind since 1987.
Yeah.
I saw them all as a kid on VHS tape, and it was to me one journey, one experience, one movie, actually. It's like all three VHS tapes. I pop them in, I watched them all in one day, and I did it numerous times. And I needed this movie to be the greatest thing in my life. Not just a great movie. It needed to be the best thing in my life. I needed to walk away just like riveting. Like just ready to pop off and fly into the sky, right? And my expectations as far as the story, I was never the kind of person who was trying to predict the story, where it was going, fan theories, what are they going to do with certain characters, how are they going to position them, none of that. All I wanted was to have a ride where I care for the characters, where I feel invested, where hits me in the feels, and not even necessarily representative of how it was back in the day. I didn't want it to harken the back days. I wanted to be new and exciting and fresh. I wanted to be bold. I wanted to be like, oh, wait, this is Star Wars now? Wait, hold on a second, but is it good? Yeah, it's. I guess I wanted to be a good film first,
yes,
and good Star Wars second, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. Yes.
Yeah, but now we can now begin to like kind of digest our hype as we're experiencing it. Right now, the movie starts, and from that very first opening scene, when the first dialogue happens, and we see Poe Dameron, we see Kylo Ren. Walk me through where your hype level, where your heartbeat is, and where it goes as you journey through the film and where it ends at the end.
Yeah, for me, I remember right off the bat the intro, which is this is we're in the desert. This is Kylo Ren's troops interrogating, right, or looking for the info on the location of Luke. Right off the bat, I'm sold. I loved the Force bullet catch, right? So if for folks who don't know, I'm very big in the villains of Star Wars, and the reason, and I'm like that for a lot of my properties, DC, Marvel, etc. I think without a very, very strong, engaging villain, a movie and a hero are not set up to really be successful. Because if I don't fear the villain, if I don't have real stakes, if I don't have even understanding for the villain, then it's half the puzzle is missing, half the piece is not completed. So my biggest concern going into the movie is like, okay, is this Kylo character going to live up to, my expectation of a good Star Wars villain? And so when we start off with him, catching the bullet, this kind of cool Force display, I'm like, okay, this is cool. The soldiers are, pretty cold-blooded in that opening scene, kind of taking out the villagers. And this is, of course, where we see Finn start to maybe get shaken at first. But I'm there. I'm okay. We kind of have maybe a little bit of darker start. Like we're getting plopped right in. It's kind of a darker tone right off the bat. We see maybe a little bit of even internal struggle of what a trooper's life would be. Like, this is interesting. So I was actually pretty much in from the start. And one thing I think that The Force Awakens did so well as we go through the film is I think for me personally, it really had the right sense of intrigue throughout the film, where I really wanted to see what was coming next. And I felt like the adventure side, and this I think is what J.J. Abrams did really well in Star Trek as well, is the adventure side of it, like the crew and the shots and the location. It just felt very like I was on this ride, and I was in, and I was really gravitating towards the characters. And we'll talk about this maybe even in future podcasts because it'll take too long. But I loved the breadcrumbs they were dropping, the intrigue. Like, who is this? Maybe we'll find out. Who is that? Where did that come from? Maybe a mystery for another day. And so it's like, oh man, as I'm moving, I'm loving this ride, and I'm also, I'm having my palate wet for things to come. We have the scene with Snoke, right? We first see our first new Emperor-like character, and he's this huge hologram look, and it's like, oh, who is this dude? He looks gnarly in the face. What's he about, right? And then where did Anakin Saber? How did they get Anakin Saber? How did we find that? And we're just going on this trip into the very end, which I actually really like the end of this movie, which I know is an homage, of course, to the Death Star. It is very much not fresh and new, but I really liked the way you have this kind of snowy, dark atmosphere. You have the death of Han Solo, which was sad. It was one thing I didn't. It was something I didn't necessarily love, because it was like, oh, you took my character who had a happy ending and you killed him. Like, you had him not end up with Leia, really, and you had his son murder him. Like, his happy ending is gone, right? Which was kind of a bummer. You're like, dude, that's it. And then what it signaled to me is like, oh, Kylo has like no chance of being redeemed. They're basically telling you right now, like, hey, this guy, like, he's not getting a redemption arc because we're gonna have him kill your favorite character, right? Because I think there's a lot of people who say Han Solo might even been, one of the canary, and it could be because Harrison Ford had such a career after that he was one of the actors that you have a lot of love for, right? So they kill him. He hates Star Wars anyway. Throw him off the side. But the end scene where we have this kind of snowy, dark atmosphere with a really raw final lightsaber fight, where you have Rey and Finn and Kylo in this like snowy, just hack and slash, right? Where I really love the vibes of that end fight. I loved the fact that it felt unrefined. I I did think Kylo should have been able to handle both easily. However, I do acknowledge he was shot, right? So he's injured and he just killed his father. He's taken 2v1. So I can kind of, buy that he might not be in his A game at this point. But I just love the rawness of it, right? It's kind of this hack and slash fight, ends with the rip in between the two of them. And, and I'm like, okay, like that was such a fun movie. I felt like it really nailed the fun. And that's a big deal. When you're in the theater, especially because you really are in the emotion of the crowd, you're in the emotion of the moment. And so I thought that Force Awakens did such a good job of being fun, why laying like little lore bits that I wanted to learn more about and characters I wanted to hear more about and understand better. Okay, how did the First Order come to be? Like what happened like between Return of the Jedi and now that this First Order was up? So by the end of the film, I remember I'm excited, I'm all in. And I remember like, okay, I got to take my dad to go see this. Like my dad's got to see this. Like it's going to be, I got to see how he feels when, Han Solo dies, right? I got to see what he feels like when Luke shows up at the end. Right. And I just remember like my excitement was there. I was really on board with this new trilogy. And I still like The Force Awakens the most of these films because I think it fundamentally got one of the easiest things to get right, but one of the most important, which is I had a good time the whole time I'm watching it. And like it doesn't always indicate a good film, but it does lead to an enjoyable experience, which is what going to the theater is about. So that's where I came at the end of the movie was like, okay, I'm in. Like there's so many cool things to learn about. There's so many new characters. It wasn't perfect. And it leaned a lot on inspiration from A New Hope, right? But these new actors and actresses I'm really into, they seem nice and funny and young and endearing. And who's this new villain and what happened to Luke? And I just remember leaving the theater like I'm in, and we'll talk about, how I went into The Last Jedi. But that was where I was in the theater. I don't know where you were. You have a totally different perspective on me being your history with Star Wars. But when I left the theater, I was like, okay, like that was great. Like I'm in. Like that was a ton of fun. I had a blast. So that's where I left.
Yeah. So now I wanted to kind of speak to where my hype level started as the film goes on and where it ended. So here I am sitting there. I'm equipped. I'm ready for the greatest experience in my life. But I also remember something that is not of my making. I remember J.J. Abrams extensively talking about in numerous interviews you could check out on YouTube, where he talks about that he will never trivialize the story or trace back and do like cameos or repeat the story beats unless it's absolutely necessary or must to kind of tie it in together and show us that it's still a Star Wars film. So the movie begins. We're on Jakku. And where this droid with secrets there. And I'm immediately getting this nagging feeling that's like, why are you retelling me the story that I know? And it fluctuates. It goes up and down, but it persists until the very end. It was one part that I could not completely let go of. But honestly, at the end of it, even upon the first response, it didn't bother me enough to like give a full score up or down to the film. It was just a little bit of an annoyance. But when the movie starts, and that first exchange between Poe Dameron and that Lor Santeca, and then with that little verbal jab with Kylo Ren, I'm immediately having sinking feeling of the prequel deja vu. I'm like, oh my God, not again. Please don't do this. Like, please, am I watching this again? I'm feeling like it's 1999 all over again. Don't do this to me. Like, I don't want this kiddie shit. I don't know. Sorry, like, pardon my French. I don't know how to explain it. I just felt so emotional. Like, oh my God, man. What happened with growing and maturing the storytelling of it? Like Empire is, like Return is. I was quite upset. Mm-hmm. And as the movie's going along, and now we start meeting Finn, and now we're introduced to Rey. And suddenly I'm settling a little bit. I'm like, hold on, Ben, hold on. Calm your horses, dude. You're an emotional guy. Like, just chill for a second. Give a movie a chance. And as I'm watching it, Daisy Ridley anchors me. Her charisma, her charm, the way that she's able to fend for herself. That she's
not to cut you off. Yeah. Her theme in the movie.
Her
was
theme
really
is amazing.
Great.
I love it. It's one of my favorite themes in Star Wars. Right? Good call out.
Yes.
And as we're journeying with her, this she is the big question mark. I'm still kind of thinking in my mind, okay, so you started me with so Resistance now, the good guys are small again. and the bad guys are big, even though they want the last trilogy. Why are you doing this again? That nagging feeling. But when the new cast takes hold of the screen, I'm invested. I'm interested. Wow, nice. When we travel to Jakku, from Jakku to Maz Kanata's castle, this is where I get my first golden moment. When Rey descends into that pit and she interacts with Luke Skywalker's lightsaber. Magic. A hero descends into the underworld to the revelation of their journey, and she's an unwilling hero. All of these classic mythological motifs hit me with a ray. I'm like, oh man, no, it's not the same thing. Chill. I told you to chill, right? Like two devil and an angel speaking to me. This is fun. This is enjoyable. All right. I'm taking the bite. And Han Solo entered the screen, and there's no Harrison Ford present. It is Han Solo.
Yeah.
It is Chewie. I'm like, oh, cool. All right. I'm not feeling some shenanigans of getting back to Falcon with the whole tribe there. Like a couple of things are happening, oddball things. I'm like, okay, all right, let's keep rolling with it. Let's see what it does. And then Kylo. I don't know how to feel about this guy. I don't hate him. I don't love him. He is not threatening. He's fluffy as a villain as a whole. The First Order sucks. It doesn't represent any kind of momentum or threat or impending doom. They're just kind of there barking orders.
Yes.
But he's such an interesting, flawed character. All right, I'm intrigued. All right, JJ, you're doing it to me. I'm there.
And a great actor.
And a great, fantastic, phenomenal actor. And then Snoke, uninspiring CGI version of upscaled Emperor who once again barks orders and is not functional to the plot at all. All right. And once we get to the peak, to the climax of the film of Han Solo's death, I knew it was coming. I didn't know how it was coming. I wasn't 100% sure of it. I loved it. It felt to me like such a nice send-off for a character that has outgrown his role in these films. And this is the theme that persists throughout the films. All of these heroes should not have belonged, the legacy cast should not have belonged in these movies. They have outgrown this trilogy. Why are you dragging these old actors back into the fold? Yes, we wanted to see them all in the Millennium Falcon for the nostalgia, for the feels, and just they don't belong here. Their story ends with episode 6. But within the context of the film that I'm seeing unfolding before my eyes, that makes sense. Patricide. How do you redeem this guy?
Yes, that's
Is it going to be redeemed, or is it going to be the savage that we will celebrate when he's gone? Boy, if you guys take it to that territory, I will be even more on board, because once again, you're pushing it into a territory that it's unexplored. And by the time that I sort of kind of enjoyed the lightsaber duel as well for its unrefined raw feel. I'm not a huge fan of the prequel duels aside from the original Darth Maul on the Duel of the Fates.
Duel of the Fates, yeah.
And the beginning battle between Anakin and Kenobi before it gets into Tarzan vine swinging thing. Like the shorter version of it would have been phenomenal.
It's long, yeah.
It's a little bit on the long side. But, there are a couple of duels that really worked for me, a couple that didn't. Like the whole CGI fest on Geonosis and lightsabers doing glowing stick rave party thing. I wasn't on board with that. They brought it back to that medieval knight, kind of like Luke versus Vader on Bespin kind of battle. I enjoyed that.
Yep.
And by the time that the movie was over, what gave me the most promise was my biggest anchor, my biggest love, my biggest passion was Rey. This unknown factor, a nobody who rises to the occasion, who will become somebody. Is she Luke's daughter? How's she going to earn her badges? What is going to happen to her?
Right.
But so by the end of the film, yes, I enjoyed it immensely. Most of my friends, even the most jaded of friends, whose name is also Ben, I remember clearly him saying like, oh, wow, man, this really felt like he's your age. He's a huge prequel fan. He's like, oh, man, this really felt awesome. I kind of don't like this part, but this was... We were hyped, man. We were all coming out enjoying it.
This is where this whole podcast kind of came from. And I don't even know if fans who might have seen our stream on Thursday, I talked about this. When The Force Awakens came out, there's kind of been like a rewriting of history.
Yeah.
Is that like the sequels have just been panned and hated forever. But it's like when The Force Awakens came out, it was, from what I saw, universally praised and loved. And I can remember Jeremy Johns being like, oh man, like, yeah, it does a lot of the same beats as A New Hope, but it feels more true to Star Wars. You look at the computer screens and they have a very similar look and the characters feel real and the music works. And we have this kind of young, charming, group of new actors.
Right.
And there was absolutely 100% optimism. And I heard people say, many YouTubers say, okay, like, this is true to Star Wars, unlike the prequels, which felt like a whole departure, a whole different look, a whole different feel, a whole different. This feels more what I saw, in the original trilogy. And there's been this kind of rewrite of history that, like, from day one, everyone hated it. Like, everyone's been hating it forever. And you didn't actually see that until, in my opinion, really late after The Last Jedi came out. This kind of this kind of internet community, this kind of YouTube community, social media community. So people started to come out and started to have and address problems they have with the film. And I am not a big Last Jedi fan, which is a different time, different part of this conversation. And then by the time The Rise of Skywalker came out, I think the community was completely split. And that movie, I think all of us, even big sequel fans, agree it is the weakest of the three films.
100%.
And when your last film is the worst, it is the last taste you leave us with. And Game of Thrones had some of the best TV ever for the first 4 seasons. But when your last 2 start to go downhill and your final one is a disaster, no one wants to revisit it. It is over. The image is ruined. That's how we are as people. Right. You can't have the last taste be terrible. And so because the last taste was terrible, now the perception is like, oh, that movies have sucked since day one. Disney's ruined Star Wars. When I think the reality is like, man, the hype and love and admiration for Star Wars after The Force Awakens was high. Star Wars Explained, Star Wars Theory, those channels exploded after Force Awakens. A whole new generation of fans were pumped. They wanted to learn lore. Ooh, who is this Snoke? Ooh, how to lightsaber? What is the black kyber crystal? Where do those go? What are kyber crystals? People who never visited the Clone Wars and got into the deeper lore, they're being exposed. And it actually did so much for Star Wars about getting the hype back from a fan base that had been kind of dormant or jaded. And I just think it's fascinating how the narrative has changed. The prequels are now universally looked at, even by myself sometimes, as like this terrible trilogy, when the reality is like there was a first movie that everyone liked, everyone was on board for, excitement was high, energy was positive. There became a second movie that had a radical kind of change.
A big like, huh?
Yes. And that totally landed for some people like yourself, missed for people like me. And there's reasons it missed. I don't have the same. A lot of people are talking about like it's Luke's characterization in that movie is what ruins it. And Luke in that movie, I don't have a problem with at all. It's I think the lack of cohesiveness to the film before is jarring. It's like, the prequels, in my opinion, feel very much in the same universe. They seem very much
absolutely.
And the sequels felt like, whoa, like this doesn't even feel like the same movie series. Like it feels like the actors are the same. So regardless, my point is there's been a narrative shift. There's been a rewrite of history that the sequels are universally hated since day one. And you'll hear people now who rip Star Wars, like Star Wars Theory. And I'm not picking on him because he's not, he's just the biggest YouTuber in the Star Wars space.
Right.
So I remember when the sequel trilogies came out, he was he was there. He was excited. He was hyped.
Like all of us.
Yes. And now by the end, we hate them and all bash them. But that wasn't the reality. That was not what happened. I was there. Yeah. Everyone liked those movies. Everyone was excited. I saw them twice in theaters. I saw them 3 times, 4 times. Yeah. I don't know. It's just interesting to me how quickly we forget, even though that movie came out 8 years ago, 7 years ago.
And it pisses me off, man, because it's I've seen the same thing happened with Star Wars prequels. These people who call themselves true fans, loyal George Lucas devout followers, they jump the ship every opportunity, any moment when something doesn't satisfy them, and then they come back and circle back and say, well, no, we know how it was loved, and now this is trash over here. But we have the right to criticize. No, you don't. You get the right to criticize, but not trash somebody for doing something that you dislike. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with the community. I think Star Wars is better for when we criticize things, but when you and I can sit down and have a discourse about it. Hey, why don't you think it worked, man? Give it to me. Give me the whole salad. I'll chew on it. I'll figure it out what you mean. Like people talking, long-form conversation, not my yesterday's, YouTube, Twitter war. I remember when TFA came out, and a week after, we're still talking about that in that higher gear, adrenaline rush kind of like mode, I went to the Barnes and Nobles, which I often do, and standing in that Star Wars aisle.
Yeah.
And as always, for decades, I would come here in New York. I would go around different bookstores. I would stand there with my friend. And when somebody else would come in and peek into that section, I would start recommending book to them.
Yeah.
And when I did it after TFA, I felt like such a snob. I'm like, oh, yeah, they're into Star Wars too now. You got to read this book. You got to read that book. It felt so good to be a Star Wars fan again. But Josh, to start wrapping this up in a kind of like a couple of follow-up questions, now that these initial levels of hype are over and you get to sit down a little bit, settle down, and look at it again, talk about your response to that film, to The Force Awakens, a few weeks after, a month maybe after, it's up to you, and today. How do you see the film today?
For me, in the immediate aftermath, I was still pro The Force Awakens for the weeks and months to come. I had a really good time with it in the theater. Here was the key, Ben. Like, you can't get over emotions that are just tied to the time. We talk about this with the prequels, and I was excited about Star Wars again in a way I hadn't been in years. Like Marvel and DC had come and overtaken Star Wars. They had, all the hype was for those films. Yeah. And all of a sudden Star Wars came back and was like, hey, I'm here. And it was like, oh, I remember why I love this kind of space fantasy. Like, this is it. Like, this is so fun. And so for me, for the months, days, and weeks, I can tell you, I was very positive on Force Awakens and extremely excited for The Last Jedi, actually, which we'll probably save for another episode.
We will, yeah.
But today, because of what became the sequel trilogy, it's not a film I revisit often because, unfortunately, because the ending is so unsatisfying, it's almost in a silly way kind of painful to revisit the first days because I remember what could have been. I remember all this great talented actors and actresses they had, the charisma, the love, and the way that it ends up missing. It makes it hard for me to watch because it's sad. I'm like, oh, it was so good. How did we miss? Like, how did this go wrong? Right? It's how did we ending your series strong cannot be understated. Too many shows go on for too long. And this is the problem, is you damage even the memory in the beginning because you're watching these characters in the beginning. You're like, I know what happens to you. I can't have someone sit down and watch The Force Awakens and tell them they're going to be rewarded at the end. They're not going to be rewarded at the end, unfortunately. Yeah. And there's some fans who like the Rise of Skywalker. I'm not saying it's everyone. It's my personal preference. I would say the majority today are not big Rise of Skywalker fans. Maybe that will change. But it's hard to revisit that film because it was a film I really like. It's still my favorite of the sequel trilogy. And I loved so much of what they did as far as like bringing my heart back into Star Wars and what a talented cast they had to work with and where it ends up. Now it's just like kind of like a what could have been. When I watch it, it's like, darn, what could have been. I remember how excited I was when I saw that. So it's unfortunate, but this happens. I mean, you have, that's what it is.
I don't think, honestly, in my humble opinion, it's nobody to blame. I don't think we should crucify J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson for having their own unique vision or voices that were incongruent with one another, or Kathleen Kennedy. I don't think it's anybody's malicious objective to set on fire their own property and make fans displeased. It's just perhaps not planned, perhaps not well orchestrated. They didn't give each sequel enough time to develop, to think out those ideas, to penetrate the spirit of Star Wars, to figure out its DNA, not just screen. Star Wars is not about screens. It's not about lightsabers. It's not about TIE fighters. What ties it all together is Luke Skywalker. What ties it all together is Anakin's journey, the fall. This is why I will always be a prequel closet fan. And I will always come out on each podcast to say, yes, I'm the fan. I'm not the fan of the films which I think were inferior in terms of filmmaking. I am the fan of the story. I'm a fan of what it represents. I am a fan of a whole generation of kids who grew up with this character. And I just made a meme, who is your favorite Skywalker? Guess who most people pick? Anakin.
That's the Anakin. Yeah.
Anakin, who is on Facebook, 30 plus to 30 minus generation. Yeah. Who matters to them the most? It ain't Luke. Am I going to give him grief for that? No, it's Anakin.
Yep.
But when it came to my kind of like impression of The Force Awakens of,
Yes.
okay, the first level of hype is over. A week after, a month after, I'm thinking to myself, I just can't let go. I can't let go while you went there. I can't let go. Why did it feel like that committee built corporate thing that was trying to like figure out what's the best catch we could get? What's the best, how do you call it, trap that we could set to snare in the fans, you know? And there's things that I like fiercely about that film. There's things that really bothered me. It was sort of kind of what I was experiencing with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, especially Revenge of the Sith, which I enjoyed the most of the prequel films. And there were things in theater, in real time, that I absolutely loved. But the difference was that in the Revenge of the Sith, I had to look for good things to like. In case of The Force Awakens, I had to look for things that really distracted me and bothered me and made the experience kind of like interrupted the experience. And at the end of the day, a couple of months after, I sat down with myself and said, is this movie as great as you thought it originally is? Nah. But be honest with yourself. Is it worthy of a Star Wars legacy? Is it worthy of that logo? Is it part of your Star Wars here? Because to me, the end consumer decides what Star Wars is and isn't. It's not George Lucas, and it's not Disney, and it's not modern writers. In what sense? It's obviously George Lucas's creation.
Of course, yes.
But my personal experience with it is my own. If I choose the original Thrawn trilogy, expanded universe of books, to be my Star Wars, you sure best believe it is. If I decide that Mace Windu, the character I did not like in the movie, is my Star Wars because I like Shatterpoint novel, you best believe it is my Star Wars. You don't decide it for me, I decide. And at the end of the day, at the end of it, I thought, yeah, it is my Star Wars. I like it. There's enough there with modern sensibility sprinkled in there. It's kind of like contrived. It's still Star Wars. Today, I still enjoy it. I still rewatch it. You and I will have a very interesting discourse about The Rise of Skywalker, because I am that mutant in the Star Wars community, like that crippled person with twisted personality that likes it. And with full recognition that it's like it's not the best of Star Wars movies, I still like it. I like it for the same reason I like prequel trilogy.
I would say you like it the way I like Attack of the Clones, where I know it's not good, but I like it. Like I loved Attack of the Clones.
Right,
like,
and then you are a prequel fan, but I like Attack of the Clones more than Phantom Menace. Right. And this is the beauty of it, the nuance.
It is.
The conversation of it.
Agreed. And it will be fun to, I think, one thing I might just end it with, because we're going to have a lot of these conversations.
Yeah, man.
Is where I've thought about this a lot, and we'll dive into this deeper later. But like once, like a lot of people say, like, what went wrong with sequel trilogy? What could they have done better? I think like it's the easiest thing, the most straightforward thing, is to have kept the vision consistent. I think the director swapping will control you as a hired gun. It works in Marvel. Marvel is even if you saw Multiverse of Madness, where you could see Sam Raimi had a clear impact on the directing, that story is Marvel. The story that was written was Marvel, right? The flash and the visuals and the action is Raimi, but the story is Marvel. And that worked for them there, even though I don't think it's the best model. It worked for them there. It did not make sense. They tried to do what I think they thought was cool. Like, oh, we'll have like 3 really talented directors all do a movie. They'll be able to put a unique flair to it. We'll have a very director-driven approach where we give them a story, we let them. But the problem there is that you have Rian Johnson, who made a movie called Knives Out. If you guys haven't seen it, it's amazing. Right. It's fantastic. He's a competent director, but he has a very specific vision for Star Wars. And then was it Colin Trevorrow or whatever who had who got left, right? Because he was like, I don't want to do, So I think the simplest fix is you just should have kept the director consistent, because I guarantee you, even though J.J. Abrams might not be the most talented director, he's not. If the movies would have all felt together and like they belong together, the opinion today would, on average, be better. Because people would probably say, well, those movies were kind of surface level. They weren't very deep. Right. But they made sense. The problem
just fundamentally accept them as Star Wars and hope for the better in the future.
And you'd say like, okay, those are fine. Those were, because a lot of Marvel movies today are average. They're average films, but they get the heart right. They get the charm of the actors, and that goes a long way. I do not hold them in the same regards that I hold the Batman that just came out,
Right.
or that I hold Dune. They're not in the same class.
They're
But
discerned.
I was there opening night for Multiverse of Madness, and I'll be there for the next one as well. You know, the way that people look at them with such disdain would be different. People might look at them more as like, there's more average Star Wars movies, whatever. But it's like the sort of disdain we have today. I think the easiest way to fix it would have been one consistent vision. And we'll talk about that in more detail.
Josh, Star Wars on High. I love talking to you, man. I sincerely do. Like you always ground me, always give me perspective. Guys, before we bounce, one last question. Single director, 6 episodes, Kenobi. Let's go, baby. How hype are you?
I am extremely excited. In fact, you see this box behind me, which has been making an appearance.
Yes.
That is an upcoming video I'm making where I got a new display, and it's Kenobi. It's one of the Kenobi posters, and I'm going to be hanging it up. So during this Kenobi month, we could have a new poster in the background. So I'm very excited. A couple weeks away now, man. We're very close.
Are you wary? Are you cautious? Are you keeping those expectations reigned?
Honestly, where I'm at today is like, we've gone through it as Star Wars fans. Like we've gone through like fighting for the last 5-6 years. Like it's just, I guess I'm kind of immune to it at this point. Like I'm just ready to go try to have fun. And what I told you on the podcast on Thursday is just seeing like Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor back, getting some love for the fans. It kind of just makes it worth it for me. Like even if the show misses, like whatever, I still have the prequels, still have the Clone Wars. I love those movies. Like this isn't going to change it for me. And the fact that they have this chance maybe to hear everyone tell them that they're great, I like that. Like it's kind of cool. So, I think you and I have said this is a project that we really want them to get right. Like, let's not sugarcoat it. But on the other hand, like, they, whatever,
Josh, I'm back in that mode again. I'm in 2015. I needed for them to get it right. Not for me, for you guys. They need to get it. My hype level is quite low. I'm not a huge fan of the live action, what they have done. They're cool. Mandalorian is cool. Boba Fett is cool. I'm not going to trash them or bring them down and say they're horrible pieces of entertainment like the goaty dude with the Star Wars visual
animation's
stuff.
Better.
Yeah, I think animation is where the heart and soul of Star Wars resides, and everything else is dessert. But more than I am hyped for Kenobi, I want them to get it right. That's just my desperate measures, last final thing to prove it right. You got the one director. You got the director that is good. You got all the actors back. This is your chance of like, come on, man, let's prove it.
I completely, yes. I saw, we'll talk about this in a future day, but I saw a fan post on Reddit, and this kind of made me, it's not always my perspective. And it was a post on the Star Wars official Reddit. It said, when I left the theaters in 2005, I thought Revenge of the Sith would be the last new Star Wars content I'd ever get. Mm-hmm. I consider everything else that has come out since then as a gift. And in the comments, what they elaborated on was like, I don't like all of it. But if you told me I would never get Star Wars again, or I'd get a bunch of average Star Wars, some bad Star Wars, but amazing things like the Clone Wars, amazing thing like the Bad Batch, I would take it every time. I would take it every time that I got some of the stuff I loved that never get another project again. And I think that's maybe a good outlook for some of us to have. I'm not saying it's right. But that was just someone's outlook that I kind of liked. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. It's like, hey, you know what? I hope it's good.
Yeah. Josh, once again, thank you so much for joining me, guys. Josh and I will probably do a part 2 of this podcast, and we will probably tie in the second and third film in this trilogy together, give you guys our thoughts, what we initially thought of them, what the hype level was, and what we think of it as of now. We would love to hear from you. Throw some comments down below. Let us know what you guys thought. Do you agree with Josh? Do you agree with me? If you have your own personal thoughts and feelings that we didn't seem to have addressed that you'd like us to touch upon next time, please, by all means, please go to Josh's channel, Star Wars on High. Him and Jimmy do wonderful content. I, of course, make it better with my presence.
On Thursday nights.
Right. Thursday night, one day only. Right? No, I love the stuff that they do with their shorter videos with lore and stuff. I love your discussions, Josh. I love your reactions. You are the voice of reason to me. You represent the Star Wars that is level-headed, that doesn't jump on these always bickerings back and forth. Anyway, excellent channel. Josh, final words and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back on here. We love to sit down and talk. Come check out our Thursday night live streams where Ben comes on. It's a lot of fun. It's a different format. It's just like think of it as just coming to talk to your friends about what came out in Star Wars that week. We just talk about the news, say if we're excited or not. It's really chill. We interact with the fans. So come on, stop by, say hello.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you enjoyed this video, sub to the channel, hit that like button. Go check out Josh's Star Wars on High. I'll drop the link in the video description below. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.